I love that question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I love it because sometimes less is more, and you're right, less is more. And I used to not think that. I used to always, want to add more and more and more. But there's this amazing quote. I don't know who said it, but I love it, and it says, "Music is not the sounds, but the space in between the sounds." And it kind of goes to your point about minimalism, and it's really the silence in between the notes that make a song. So I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know how how I stay away from overlayering, or how I prevent myself from overlaying. I think it's just I've developed my own sound and my own style over time, and I think that's just part of it.
You're listening to the Freio
Music Podcast.
To the Freio Music
Podcast.
My name is Allan Nudelman. I go by Kalaman on stage and on all platforms. And I produce all of my music and all of my performances under the name Kalaman.
And Alan, when did you first get started and get going in the music space? Like, what was your first curiosity as a kid?
That's a good question. It goes way back to when I was a kid. I've always been very musically inclined, and ever since I can remember, I've been creating tunes in my head and getting songs stuck in my head. But I would say about when I was about 16, 17, I started going to my first music festivals and concerts, and that was really the spark that kind of made me realize I wanted to not only attend, but also be a part of and create.
Nice. And back then, when you were first starting to go and experience the music in the live scene, were there any particular events or acts that really stood out looking back on it?
Yeah, I would say I grew up in South Florida, and I went to Ultra Music Festival when I was 16 or 17 for the first time. I don't remember there being a particular DJ or set that inspired me, but I just remember attending the festival and being in the middle of it all, and thinking that it would be really cool to be on the other side of the crowd.
And what gave you the confidence to think that you could get to the other side of the gate? Because you got tens of thousands of people on one side, and you only got a handful of people on the other side. So what made you believe that you could get to the other side?
I wouldn't say at the time it was a belief that I could. It was more so a dream or a desire or an idea that I thought was cool, that was attractive to me. I talk about this often, actually. I think back in the day when I started kind of first thinking about what it would be like to be on the other side of the crowd, my reasons were all the wrong reasons. And I think, at the time and for many years, it was rooted in ego and maybe rooted in, wanting to be on the stage and be the center of attention, and be recognized for that. And I think it was a lot less about wanting to share music and wanting to share experiences with people and wanting to provide experiences for people in the crowd. To answer your question, I don't think it was I believe I can do this. It was more so I I think it would be really cool.
And so once you came to that realization, what were some of the first steps to creating music that, once your mind was open to the possibilities, and you said it might have been, maybe a little ego driven at first or the wrong reasons, but what initially got you started in the creation process, and how did you get started?
Well, that took many years. It was definitely not an overnight thing. I was always musically inclined, but I never learned an instrument, and I never attended any music lessons or anything like that. My parents just, I guess I didn't ask for it, and my parents were also, they're not musicians themselves, and I think you know, they were always very loving and supportive, and I was always in good schools and in sports teams and a lot of other extracurriculars, but music was never one of them. And so once I realized that I wanted to get into music and DJing, and initially it was I wanted to DJ. I wasn't super interested in producing music, but when I realized that I wanted to get into music, I started feeling resentful towards my parents for never making me learn an instrument or teaching me, how to play the guitar or the piano, and I felt that way for many years, and I kind of assumed that I couldn't get into it because I was too old. I would see some of my friends or others who were really good at playing an instrument, and I said, oh, that's only because they've been doing it since they were 2 years old, and I could never do that. And then slowly I started picking up the guitar. I started, teaching myself the guitar. I'm not very good at it, to be honest, but I started realizing that I could actually teach myself a thing or two, and about when I was 20 or 21, I signed up for a music production course at my university, and it was focused on Logic Pro, which is one of the top music production softwares. And the rest is history. I never stopped producing, after taking that course, and over the years I've taught myself a little bit of music theory, and I would say that I'm mostly driven by my curiosity and my ears. I don't really know music theory, but it's been a wonderful journey of being able to create my own taste and create my own understanding of music without having been taught formally at a young age.
Yeah, sometimes I think that that's an advantage because you don't have the preconceptions of what you're supposed to do in a formal sense. Whatever note
Right.
you're playing, to you, maybe the entire keyboard is fair game, but to somebody else,
Exactly.
they kind of filter through their scales and their knowledge of music theory.
Right. Yeah, sometimes, some people play music with their head, others play with their heart, others can do both. It's funny, I've met musicians who are really, really, really good musicians, formally trained, and sometimes they can't improvise because they can't play without sheets, and that's always been an interesting concept to me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've tried to jam with some people too, and they're really classically very talented, but when you try and jam, it's not written. There's no textbook. How do I do this? You gotta
Right.
feel it out. That's interesting. So do you still use Logic today when you're creating?
I do use Logic. I've been saying for 7 years that I'm gonna switch to Ableton because that's what a lot of people who produce electronic music have told me. But I'm so ingrained in Logic, and I know, the tool very well at this point. So it's kind of hard to get out of it. I think at this point, I'm gonna stay.
Nice. And what were some of the big breakthroughs in that college course that you took, that the one that initially taught you Logic? Was it the teacher was excellent? Was it the other students? Or was it breakthroughs on the software itself? What was so impactful?
I would say it was the software itself, and just the endless possibilities. The teacher was just a guide. The teacher would show us, where to click in what was possible. You know, what I learned there was just the tip of the iceberg, and I would say that what I know about Logic today is still the tip of the iceberg. So just you know, I just was super attracted to all the possibilities on the, you know, what you can do with the music and with the software. And I remember I had unlimited access to the music lab, so I could stay after class, I could go on the weekends, and I did. I spent so many hours in that room just exploring all the different tools and the different functions and effects on the platform. It is very technical, but I would say, you know, it's a software, and it's kind of, you're supposed to inject the creativity into it. The software is just there to, you know, as a tool for you to be able to be creative. Some of the functions and the features are so well thought out, and so, you know, they're inspiring in and of themselves. And you know, props to Apple for creating such an amazing product. And yeah, I mean, it was really the software that taught me what was possible.
Yeah, I like the way you said that about injecting creativity. That's what you're there for, and the software is just to kind of embrace it and make it work. Let's talk about some of your recent tracks that you just came out. Kumaya. So first of all, what was the inspiration behind it, and why did you create it?
Kumaya has a pretty interesting story. I started the track in April of 2020, so we were peak COVID-19 pandemic. It was around the time where we still didn't know how long we would be in quarantine. It was just kind of starting, and we were fully locked down. I was in South Florida. So I started this track, and, you know, I made a 30-second sketch of the track. It was a short little idea. And then I abandoned the project, and I never looked at it again. Over a year later, I was in New York. I moved to New York about a year after that. And a few months after moving to New York, my friend Michael, who is Mikael from Montreal, who goes by the name Cora. He's an amazing producer and DJ, and an amazing person overall. He had a gig in New York, and he stayed at my place for the weekend. And I don't know why, I pulled up that project and I showed it to him, and he totally loved the 30 seconds that I had. And he said, if you can finish this track by tomorrow, I'll play it in my set. And, you know, I've never finished a track in less than 3 months. And here he was challenging me to finish it in a day. So it was funny because we went out to lunch and to dinner, and you know, we were out. And the whole time I was thinking, I need to get back home. I need to finish this track so he can play it tomorrow. And I did. I did it. I don't know how I got it done, but I just sat in the studio. He was sitting on the couch behind me, and I just finished the track. And I gave it to him. He played it, and that was kind of how the track was completed. And the name didn't come until later. The story of the name is also a great story. By the way, a lot of times I'll create a track and then I'll let it sit, and then, you know, kind of takes on a meaning. So a lot of the names of my tracks come after the tracks are made. But the story of the name of Kumaya comes from, I had an experience with about 10 friends. We went on a trip in Joshua Tree area in California, and we went to a sort of a commune in the desert. This place in the Cuyama Valley in California that is, very well built. This place with really, really solid infrastructure, kind of like tents and a little area for gathering, for meals, an area for yoga, an area for sitting around a campfire, and it's this really magical kind of oasis in the middle of the Cuyama Valley in California. And we went there, and we had a 3-day weekend getaway, and we attended this small festival, with music and cacao ceremonies and meditation sessions and yoga sessions, and very intimate meal times. And there was about 60 people at this place, at this kind of weekend gathering, but I attended with 10 of my friends. And we just had this incredible, bonding experience, all the way from meeting up with my 10 friends in LA to driving to this place where we spent the weekend, to, spending time there and dancing there and sharing, moments together, all the way to driving back to LA from this place. I kind of realized that our friends are the most important things, one of the most important things in our life, and our friends are the family that we get to choose for ourselves, and our friends really have the power to make us better people. And I kind of I became obsessed with this concept ever since then, and I've been ever since then I've been kind of looking for ways to implement more of this in my life, and to kind of encourage more gatherings with friends. And it's funny because we were in the Cuyama Valley, and when we created the group chat with the group of friends who was there, when we created the group chat after the event, somebody created the group chat and they misspelled it, and they wrote Kumaya, which is the name of the track. So this track kind of represents this idea of friendship, and our friends being the people who make us who we are, and the people who help us be better people. And so I created the track a long time ago, and then the track kind of adopted this meaning, which means obviously means a lot to me.
When you began creating the track, what was going through your mind initially? Like that 30 seconds, that you mentioned. Yeah.
To be honest, I don't remember. A lot of times when I start tracks, it's not me. It's kind of something takes over me. When I really feel inspired and I sit down at the desk, things just come out. And then I kind of create some initial, inception or seed of what ends up being a track. But a lot of times when I start music, it's a little bit spontaneous and unplanned. I don't remember what inspired the initial sounds, to be honest.
Well, that's such a cool story that you had that the friendly pressure to get it done, and you did. And without that urgency or that that line in the sand deadline, who knows? Maybe it's still sitting in that 30-second form.
Yeah, and I think ironically that is what Kumaya stands for. It's a friend who was at my studio and who believed in my music, or who liked my music more than I did, and who saw the potential for this track, and he encouraged me to finish it.
So there is another song on that EP, Bengali. Talk to me about that one. What's the origin story for that?
Bengali was, I produced Bengali pretty recently, actually. I kind of just, added it to the release together with Kumaya, last minute. The origin is a few months ago. I was working. I don't do music full time, or I would say I do music full time, but I also do something else full time. And I was working in my other work, and I was going through some pretty stressful things. During this time, it was maybe a month long. There was a lot of big problems going on at work, and a lot of things that I had to make sure I got done, and a lot of deadlines, and I was under a lot of stress. And this month was actually one of the most creative periods of my whole life. And I would say I created some of my favorite tracks during this time. Bengali was one of them. And it was kind of some tracks take years to make, and some tracks like Bengali take weeks or days. Bengali was done in about 2 weeks. Yeah, that's the origin.
Nice. And what when you sit down at a blank slate, a blank Logic project, and you're under all this stress at work, what do you start out with? Like, what are your go-to first layers or plugins or VSTs that you toss on the project?
I always start my tracks with a bass line. My favorite tracks of mine have always started with a bass line, and I kind of work up from there. So I'll start with the bass line. I will add the kick, and then I'll start adding, the mids. I don't do the melodic elements of the track until later. So the initial mids are kind of more rhythmic and repetitive, kind of maybe like arpeggios, or just repetitive loops on the mids. And then I'll build in the drum layers, slowly. And the drum layers are very different in each track, but I'll go down the rabbit hole on the web and download a bunch of samples, or record a bunch of samples in my studio or outside my studio, and kind of build the drum layers from there. And then once I have the low end with the bass and the kick, and a little bit of mids and the drums or the percussion, then I kind of go into this trance-like creative stage where I build the melodies on top.
Yeah, I like the way that you phrase that. So I wonder, when you're pulling all those sounds from the internet, the drum layers, and you call it like going down the rabbit hole of sample finding, how do you organize all that once you have it? Are you very organized on your computer? Is it chaos, folders within folders? Are you real organized with like the way you lay out your drum samples?
Well, in terms of I think that's a skill, to be honest. To be organized is a skill, but it also helps a lot with creativity, and I've learned this the hard way. When I first started making music, I was kind of like, I would download stuff, and I had my downloads folder full of garbage, but also full of gems that I would never find again because they were lost in the folder. And I would create my projects on Logic, and they would have terrible naming and terrible ordering, and I would have my drums would be like all over the place, and the files that I thought I would maybe use were also there on the side, and it was, the colors were all the same. I didn't color code anything, but slowly I kind of started adopting a more organized approach, and it's really helped me be a better producer. I have my templates for the sound. For sometimes I'll start a project with a template, right, with a kick that I know I like, a snare that I know I like, a hat that I know I like, some instruments that I know I like that I might want to use on that track. Everything is named properly, everything is organized. I delete samples that I know that I don't like or that I don't want to use anymore, and it just keeps everything cleaner. And then when it comes to creating new projects, it's just a lot easier to be creative when everything you need is organized.
Yeah, I like that. Well said. And how do you color code your tracks? Just for fun, curiosity. Like Like low
Yeah. So
frequencies are a color.
yeah, my grouping is, it changes from project to project, but overall I would say I have my kick and my bass. That's one color. I have my drums, so my snares, my hats, my shakers. Um, then I have a separate group, which, it's also drums, but I call it percussion. And that's like my bongos, my congas, my bells, my, all other, whatever else is not in the drum group that is still a percussive element. Um, then I have my pads in another group. Then I have my keys in another group. Then I have my bells in another group. And sometimes I'll group these together. Like if I don't have too many things in a group, I'll kind of combine two groups. But I think of it as kind of, I go from the low end to the high end. Those are kind of the groupings, and within those groupings, there's, the different elements within each range.
Nice. And then when you're laying out your project in Logic, do you group them vertically as well? You kind of organize them by color, so or the lows are at the bottom, or how do you think of it?
Always have the lows at the top.
Yep.
Yeah, I always have my drum and my kick and my bass at the top, my mids and my highs.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you're very organized, and that would certainly help you get started when you're, sitting down at a blank slate. Like I think of the analogy of the writer who's sits down at a blank page and has to write something. The blank page is sometimes daunting, but when you start it with a template, you already have a few sounds that are not going to be instantly offensive. That at least you can start, playing around with the bass and figuring out a bass line. And then once you kind of
Yeah.
solidify those early MIDI lines, do you change the instruments or the sounds, or do you try and get the sounds locked in before you lay down the MIDI?
It's all. I mean, it depends on the project. All of my projects have samples and MIDI elements. So there's no, for me, there's no formula or standard way of doing it. I kind of, it changes every time.
And what do you do when you're not feeling creative? Like, so if you sit down, things are just it's one of those days where it's just not coming easily. What do you do in that situation?
I just stop. I mean, I don't. I used to try to force it. I used to say, today at 5 I'm gonna make music, and sometimes, I would sit down at 5 and I couldn't make any music, and that could be very frustrating. But I kind of stop working that way. Sometimes I have, creative bursts where I'll make music for 5 days every day, and I'll make, a lot of good music. And then there's other times where I'll have, weeks where I don't feel inspired or where I can't force myself to make anything, and that's okay with me.
And what time of day do you tend to be most productive, or creatively and musically?
Yeah, that also doesn't really. I don't really have a. I don't have a more creative time of the day. I think it's pretty random. Sometimes I'll be, I'll wake up and I'll go straight to the to the studio, and sometimes I'll, stay up all night, and sometimes it'll be the middle of the day, and maybe I'll be out and about, and I'll say I need to go home now. I need to make some music. It's pretty random.
What would you say was a major turning point in your life? You mentioned Ultra, or the music festivals and things like that, but maybe there was another moment in your career so far that you feel like was maybe a fork in the road where you had a big choice to make. Talk to me about maybe something that was like career altering decision.
I would say, one of the most influential decisions I've made that has really catapulted me in the music has been moving to New York. I moved to New York for many reasons. I moved to New York for work primarily, and I knew that moving to New York would be good for me in terms of music. I knew that a lot of the producers that I like to listen to, they live in New York, or they passed through New York often. I knew that there was some creative energy in New York that would benefit me in some way. But I really underestimated the amount of creativity that moving to New York unlocked for me, and the amount of music that I've been able to produce in New York versus, compared to South Florida where I was before.
And what is it about New York? Is it just the population, or do you live in Manhattan? Like, what is it?
I think that's the age-old question about New York. It's a question that's been around forever. Why do people love New York? Why do people come to New York? They say dreams are made and killed in New York or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I think I think New York has just this infinite essence about it. There's an infinite amount of things in New York that just from being here for one day, you realize you'll never see it all. The amount of people that are here from all different parts of the world for all different reasons, doing all different things, having all sorts of dreams and ambitions. I think all of that collectively just creates this character of limitless possibilities, I think, and that's very inspiring. It's very humbling and also encouraging at the same time. And I think all of those things are recipes for creativity.
Yeah, I also love the fact that New York, it just never turns off. Like, it's always on. Things are open, energy's there,
Right.
all hours. And you go through the
Right.
subways, it's wild. Like, the amount of creativity. You're on the subway and somebody comes on, starts freestyling, or whatever's going on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of artistic energy. I certainly know what you're talking about. I never lived there, but I'm glad that you're making the most of it. When you're working in such like a busy environment, you have another job. How do you tune your mind and hone into like your creativity and just make sure that you're in a positive state in order to create? Do you have any strategies for kind of that inner mental work?
I think, I mean, first of all, I'm a big believer in, the easiest way to be creative is to be happy. And I think, if you're happy, you're at peace. And if you're at peace, you can create. Although there's obviously so many different ways to be creative, and a lot of people who are not happy are some of the most creative people who've ever lived, and obviously there's a lot of great works that have been created as a result of suffering and pain. So I don't think being happy is the only way, but I think I have a lot of friends. I love being around friends. I have an amazing support system here. They make me really happy, and they encourage me to create and to make music, and they're always there for me if I'm going through a tough time or if I need people to talk to. I feel like I have my friends make me really happy, and that's very helpful for creating. I also really enjoy what I do on my day to day. I love what I do for work.
What is that?
I work in real estate. Specifically, my particular job is involved with construction and renovation of apartment buildings and apartments. So it's also a very creative pursuit. I get to work with architects and builders, and I get to choose what materials we use and what colors we use and how things look, which is a very creative pursuit for me, and it's something that I really enjoy, and I meditate, and I think meditation is a very important part of creativity. I think resting your mind is one of the most important ingredients to being creative, and to being happy, to being at peace and being happy. So I think just the combination for me, I would say my recipe is being surrounded with friends, doing work that I truly enjoy, and giving myself space for meditation are all things that help me be creative.
And when you meditate, do you meditate with a mantra? Is it part of a set practice? How do you meditate?
I've tried everything. I've really tried everything. These days, I am meditating. I'm doing a kriya from the Kundalini practice, which has been pretty great for me lately, and I'm sure I will change, my method. But as I have a million times, right? I've tried a lot of things, but right now I've been meditating with this kriya from the Kundalini practice, which is, I'll sit down on my meditation pillow, and I will repetitively touch my thumb with my index finger, my middle finger, my ring finger, and my pinky finger. And I'll do that for 30 minutes. And on each finger, I'll say the words. I'll start with one finger. I'll say sa, da, na, ma. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with this one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've loved Kundalini.
And
So yeah, that's a good one.
yeah, Kundalini is just so deep and so powerful, and there's a lot of techniques within Kundalini that are very powerful. But I love this one because this technique is so Sata Nama means it's kind of like 4 cycles of life and death. So Sa means the unborn, Da means birth, Na means death, and Ma means kind of like going back into the ether, or back into the universe, or back into the one, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm sure different people will interpret Satanama in different ways, but I think that everyone would agree that Satanama refers to the cycle of life and death. And the technique is cool because for 30 minutes you're kind of repeating the cycle of life and death, and it kind of it's very humbling to think like you are just one of the millions and billions of creatures that are living in this never-ending cycle of life and death. So yeah, it's pretty powerful, and I would say like if you really for me, I really focus on it, and it's humbling.
And when you are going through that meditation, are you connecting it to your breath as well?
I'm always mindful of my breath, but this technique in particular, it's not I don't think it's meant or designed to be with sort of a specific rhythm, although maybe. And there's so many different.
Yeah, there's like an infinite number of variations I'm sure anybody could do. I was just curious if that's how you did it. But my next question is, when you're mentally going through it, what are you bringing your mind to each of those words and what they mean, or are you trying to kind of get into a trance or like get into the zone in some way?
I love talking about this stuff, and I love sharing, my experiences about this stuff. But it's I'm so amateur when it comes to this. I think it takes years and years and years and years of practice to really master a technique or a form of meditation. So I say all of this very humbly, and I don't know anything. I'll kind of preface with that. But for me, I think what I try to do is get into a trance, and I've only been successful at it a few times. But yeah, the few times where I have been successful has been kind of repeating this phrase over and over and over, to the point where I'm kind of just listening to it as if somebody else or something else was saying it, and it's not me. And that that kind of trance-like state has been very powerful. But then again, right, there's there's a whole thing about not trying to get anywhere, not trying to have a goal when you meditate, or not trying to reach a trance-like state or any other kind of state. It's kind of defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful practice, though, to just meditate, be one with your mind, and listen to it, whatever it is doing. So my Kundalini teacher used to say, "You are not your mind," and that one, for that phrase in particular, used to kind of stand out to me for some reason, because I think therefore I am. Who's that? Descartes. the philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
So this was kind of going against that, the thinking
Mm-hmm.
being not being who you are the observer of your thoughts. Anyways, I appreciate you indulging me on that quick little tangent and Kundalini meditation. Probably didn't expect that one coming earlier today. So
I love it.
thanks.
Yeah, I love it.
Let's transition back to your music. There's definitely some other songs that I'd like to talk about. One in particular, Soul. First of all, it's got a really deep, I would say, dark sounding bass. And you mentioned before that you like to start with the bass. But then there's some really organic percussion that comes in, and it kind of gives it this unique feel. And I'm wondering, well, first of all, whose vocals are those? Is that you in the mic?
No, it's not actually. I found this vocalist on the internet, and I heard some of his music, and I thought it was great. And I reached out to him, and I wrote the lyrics, I wrote the melody, I sent it to him, and he, sent it back. He sent back a WAV file. It was kind of like just like an eye-opening moment of what's really possible on the internet. You can just find this beautiful voice and hire them and collaborate with them and make art together.
And then there's a very minimalistic approach to the song and your music in general. And I wonder, what do you try and keep in mind to avoid over layering? Because it's so easy to add 5 extra layers, 10 extra layers in the digital realm. How do you make sure that you don't get even close to that overlayering kind of cacophony that results?
Yeah.
What do you keep in mind to make sure that you're staying pure to the sound that you're after?
I love that question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I love it because sometimes less is more, and you're right, less is more. And I used to not think that. I used to always, want to add more and more and more. But there's this amazing quote. I don't know who said it, but I love it, and it says, music is not the sounds, but the space in between the sounds. And it kind of goes to your point about, minimalism, and it's really the silence in between the notes that make a song. So I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know how, how I stay away from overlayering or how I prevent myself from overlaying. I think it's, it's just, I've developed my own sound and my own style over time, and I think that's just part of it.
Well, tell me about Soul, the track. What was behind it? What was like the underlying feeling that you're trying to get out, or what was some of the emotion that was going through your head at that time?
So Soul is, first of all, Soul is the first real track that I would consider that I released. It's really what made Kalaman a known project. After its release, it got picked up by a bunch of, Spotify editor playlists, and different musicians and DJs around the world started buying the track, and it was really the first time I realized that, like, wow, this is, I made a song and people are listening to it and people are buying it. Whereas before, a lot of my productions were kind of like, my friends supported me and my family supported me, and they had a very little streams. But this track, we're about to hit 2 million streams in a few weeks, I would say. So it's really like a very special song to me. It's the song that kind of showed me what was possible and that I am capable. It was inspired by, at the time I was listening to a lot of Nicola Cruz, who is an amazing producer who, plays a lot of, he has a very broad style. He has a lot of different kinds of tracks, but I was particularly in love with his South American influenced, indigenous influenced style, and his there's a song called Colibria by Nicola Cruz, and the lyrics are just are so abstract. They talk about nature, but in such an abstract way, and I thought that was really cool how he kind of just made these really trippy lyrics. And I was also really inspired by Nicolas Jar. I still am. He's one of the best producers in my opinion, in of all time, in my opinion, and not just electronic music, but he's really just an amazing artist overall. His sound influenced me a lot, for this track. And so I don't know, I got these kind of inspiration from different artists, and I really like this, using wooden sounds and the sounds of water and organic samples. And I was also inspired to make lyrics that were abstract, but also, talk about nature and some of the more raw elements. And if, the track is in Spanish, but it's kind of doesn't really make any sense. It doesn't really tell a story or say anything. But the lyrics are just about, they talk about water and they talk about fire and they talk about wind, and it's kind of, just these concepts, these raw concepts that don't really fit a narrative or tell a story.
Interesting.
And yeah, that's kind of a little bit of the story.
And were you, I noticed a few guitar riffs. You mentioned earlier you picked up the guitar as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Was that your guitar?
That was my guitar.
Nice. Yeah. What I appreciate about some of these songs is that there are new layers and elements that kind of come in, sprinkled in, not overly repetitive, and there's some new sound element that enters that you won't hear again. And the various layers that you're able to add, I really feel like make the track what it is. So
thank you for that.
So one other track, Luna. Tell me about that one. That one's more recent than Soul, but what was, that's a collaborative piece. So tell me about that one. What was the origin? What was some of the inspiration?
That one was cool because I started a track, and then I called my friend Mario, who goes by Espinosa. That's his artist name. And I said, I have a track. I would love your vocals. He has a beautiful, beautiful voice. If you want to look him up on Instagram, on Spotify, it's Espinosa. On Instagram, I think it's Canta Espinosa, and he has a lot of videos of him singing there. I think he has an angelic voice. And so I sent him this track, and I said, hey, do you want to just play around with this, try to make some, put some vocals on it? And he did, and he created these beautiful vocals, which ended up being on the track Luna. But when he sent it back, I completely changed the song. The original track that I had sent him to sing over is extremely different from the final product, and which is just goes to show how collaborative the project was. My track inspired his vocals, but then his vocals inspired a new track when he sent it back. And so it's one of my favorite Kalaman tracks, and the melody he got inspired by a song from Azerbaijan. I forget the name of it. It's a very, very, very old song, and he he wrote the lyrics for Luna. It's in Spanish, but interestingly, everybody thinks it's not Spanish. Everybody thinks it's a Middle Eastern language, and even people who speak Spanish sometimes can't tell that it's Spanish. So it's kind of like this enigmatic, very abstract kind of track that has like some mystery to it, which I love.
So I'm noticing a trend here. There's a few songs of yours in Spanish. Do you have some sort of heritage that is inspired by, or is this just kind of a happen to be?
No, I was born in Colombia. I was born in Colombia. My father is from Colombia. My mom's from Venezuela. So yeah, definitely have heritage. You know, I have roots in South America, and Spanish is my first language.
There you go. And how many languages do you know, out of curiosity?
Just Spanish and English.
Okay, excellent. Well, a few other questions for you. So, looking over the course of your life, what has been one of the best investments that you've ever made? It could be a monetary investment, or it could be an investment of time.
I would say probably travel.
Where to, out of curiosity? Any particular spots that were impactful?
Yeah, I've traveled a lot. Lately I haven't traveled so much, but you know, a few years ago would spend all my money traveling and all my extra time traveling. Some of my favorite travels have been in Southeast Asia. I love Thailand. I love Vietnam. I also spent a good amount of time in Peru and in Colombia. Really like weeks, you know, months in each of these places, traveling to not just the big cities but also the tiny towns, the tiny villages where, you know, people don't speak English, or people haven't seen, you know, I've been to, you know, places in Vietnam where people haven't seen a camera or haven't seen a picture of themselves on a digital screen. Yeah, traveling has just, I mean, you know, anyone who travels like that would know or would agree. I think traveling is just a very eye-opening experience. Traveling as a concept is just a very insightful experience, and you know, meeting different people from different parts is very eye-opening, and kind of creating references for yourself, you know, like seeing how other people live and what other people have and what other people work for to be happy in different countries and different cultures. Those are all reference points, I think, that are, you know, influence the way that I appreciate the things that I have and the place that I live. And I've always learned a lot about myself traveling. It's kind of like, you know, when you go somewhere else, everything around you changes, and so the only thing that doesn't change is you, right? So when you're kind of in a place where everything in the exterior is different, it kind of highlights the things in your interior, because it's the only thing that you kind of know. And yeah, traveling has been one of the best investments of money and time, I would say, in my life.
Oh, that's a great answer, and I love the phrase that you used, that it adds like internal references. You know, to me, it made me think of like a library. You know, one book references another book, and some people's mental libraries are just so myopic, they haven't been out of their town. So it's important to have those external references to communities that live entirely different than you. And I really appreciated that phrase that you said. So thanks for answering that one.
Of course.
So if a young musician approached you today and asked for your advice, what would you say?
I would say thank you for soliciting my advice. I would probably say if you're not happy with what you're creating initially, you're doing something right. And if you are not satisfied with what you're creating, it means like you're going down the right path. That's kind of part of the process is getting frustrated and not feeling satisfied with what you're creating, and also feeling incapable of producing things when you compare yourself to others. And I think that all of that is part of the creative process and the artist's journey. And I would say that, you know, that shouldn't discourage somebody from continuing to to do their art.
So the struggle is part of the path. Like if you're struggling, you're right. You're on the right path.
You're on the right path. Exactly.
Now, is there ever a light at the end of the tunnel, or is it a constant struggle like that Greek person who had to roll the boulder up a hill forever?
The ball
eternity?
forever.
Sisyphus. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think we're all on our own paths, and we all have our version of the light at the end of the tunnel, and we all have our version of the struggle. So, it's not for, I'm no one to say yes or no, there's a light. But in my experience, I think I'm always kind of working to be better, and I'm always kind of looking to become a better artist. And I don't know if that will ever end, but I can say that I have reached a point where I feel comfortable in my creative process, and I feel comfortable with the things that I create, and I am not shy to share those things. And in a way, that is a light at the end of the tunnel, that I've already kind of passed that threshold. So, but that's my experience. That might not be everybody's experience. And also, who knows? Maybe, we're always reinventing ourselves. Maybe I'll reinvent myself, and I'll realize that, I'll be back at square one after reinventing myself and then wanting to try new things, or getting, I might start getting frustrated again at my inability to produce something good if I start trying something new. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I feel like we're all always raising the bar for ourselves. So once you're able to create that very first track, that means something, right? Before you couldn't create anything. Now you've created a track.
Right.
And then the goal is to improve it, and then improve it and improve it. So in that same general topic, when do you know a song is done? When can you let it out?
That's the best question of all. I don't know. It's just every track is different, and the moment of realizing the track is done, that moment is different for every track.
Especially if you have a good friend that puts a 24-hour deadline on you.
Yeah, and even after that, I edited the track a million times. After I sent him V1, I finished the track, but that was just V1, and then there was V50. I don't know. I actually don't. Now that you ask me, now that I'm thinking about it, I actually don't remember any point. I don't remember any of the moments where I said this is done. I actually don't remember that. I think it's more of like a, you're always saving the project and exporting the track, so that you could hear it in the car, you could hear it on your headphones, so you could hear it in different speakers. And I think there comes a point where you just kind of like, oh, this version sounds good enough, and then you just release it. I actually don't remember any moment in my studio where I'm exporting a track and I'm like, this is the last export. I think it kind of just happens.
It makes me think of the Will Ferrell, and I think it was Old School. He's like, I just blacked out what happened. So it's like, you woke up the next morning, okay, it's published. Oh, what happened? Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, well, that's cool. And I agree with you. You got to export it. You got to listen on those various speakers. And then maybe there comes a time where it's like, I don't hear any errors, or like there's nothing that's demanding that I need to go back in and edit. So then it just kind of has a natural.
Yep. And then I've also had tracks where I'm like, the track is done, it's ready to be shipped, it's packaged, we're done with this project. And then like I'll hear it one last time, and then I have to ask the label, like, hey guys, don't release it yet, I need to make a change. And usually everyone's like, it's perfect, you don't need to change anything. And that happens sometimes, where you make these like last minute changes on tiny things. So yeah, I think if you wanted to work on a track forever, you could. I think you could.
I think that's a great quote.
You could not finish a track if you wanted to. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. I love that phrase. All right. So outside of music, what are you into? You mentioned your job, what you do creatively, but maybe outside of that, what are you into?
I love architecture. I love photographing architecture. And I live in one of the greatest cities in the world for that. So, sometimes I'll go outside with my camera and take pictures of buildings.
Do you have a digital camera or a film?
I have both. And also my iPhone 12 it's amazing. The camera's amazing. So I love that. I also I'm a big community gatherer. I would say one of my passions is gathering people. So I love hosting. I love, getting people together. I love cooking breakfast for my friends. I love hosting people at my house on a Sunday afternoon and DJing in the living room with friends. So yeah, I think that's another one of my passions is gathering people.
Well, if somebody doesn't already know you, what are the best links that they could go to discover your music, to stay up to date with any new releases or anything that you have going on in your life?
Totally. So I'm working on a website right now. I don't know, when people are going to hear this, but hopefully the website will be done by then. It'll be kalamanmusic.com. That should be the kind of like the door to every other link or every other platform. Otherwise, my Instagram is pretty up to date. I always post stuff there, and all of my links are on my Instagram. So if you go on my Instagram and click the link on my bio, that'll also take you to like another list of links to all other platforms. My Instagram is Kalaman Music.
Excellent. Well, Allan, is there anything else that you want to cover today that we didn't get the chance yet to talk about?
No, I'm impressed by how deep we went. I think we covered more than I could have imagined.
Cool. Well, now we got the Kundalini. We're deep into many of the musical production techniques as well. So I appreciate you coming on, being an open book, sharing your story, sharing your music, first of all, creating the music. Much respect for putting your art out there, sharing it with the world, and sharing your time with me today on the podcast. I know I found it amazing, and I hope other people enjoy it as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, for reaching out to me, and for supporting my music. I had a great time. Thank you so much.
El mango se va a caer. Oye, cuidado con ese árbol. Que el mango se va.
You've been listening to the Freio Music Podcast with Michael Morahan. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. And don't forget to share this podcast everywhere. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay tuned.
Freio Music, Freio Music, Freio Music, Freio Music. You are listening to Freio Music.